Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. It's good to be back from conference, tremendous conference. We'll hear more about that in just in our service. But we want to welcome you out to our Sunday school. And we have been looking at a series called Let Us. And 13 times in 12 verses. And we're going to look at the verse that it's actually mentioned twice in this morning. The term let us is used, and this has to do with a Christian position or a Christian posture that we have, that we need. And the apostle in the book of Hebrews is building a case. They had begun to revert into their religious ways, into their old religion. And as a result of that, a major theme of the book of Hebrews is better, a better way, a better covenant, a better sacrifice. And that term is used numbers of times in the book of Hebrews, as well as this term, let us. Have this posture that gives us, let us fear, let us have grace, let us lay aside, as we're going to look at this morning, let us go on to maturity. All of these kinds of terms have to do with a Christian posture that is not just for the gifted or not just for special Christians or called people. This is for every believer and critical to our spiritual growth and literally our spiritual prosperity, if you will. Our spiritual health, our spiritual blessing, our spiritual abilities. And so this is what we've been looking at, and it's good to examine these, I believe, because they are very helpful to have in our Christian life, from let us fear and be in awe to let us have grace, to let us not forsake the assembling of ourselves together, and on and on and on it goes. And so this morning we're going to look at a different one. Let us lay aside. And like I said, it's in the verse with two of these. Then we'll look at the second one next week. But are there any questions or comments to this point? Okay, we're going to get then some scriptures. I need our main text, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Who would get that? Jeremy. And then I need Matthew 19, 16 through 22. Carrie. Luke 14, 26 and 27. Aiden. Luke 9, 59 through 62. Alicia. And Luke 10, 41 and 42. D. And so this will get us through the first part of this study. And so, again, this is mentioned twice, so we'll be on this text for 2 weeks. But let's look at this. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2.
Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of God.
And so here he talks about let us lay aside the weight, every weight, and the sin, and we'll look at both of those in just a second. And let us run the race, which is a different let us. They are obviously very connected. It's talking about running a race and putting down weights, but they are worthy to look at separately because I believe that they are separate issues that we can examine. There's people who are trying to run the race with the weights, and then there are people who are holding on to the weights and not allowing them to even begin to run the race. And so he mentions two issues here that we're going to break up and look at very straightforward. One is weights that slow us down and sins that ensnare us. And so these are two separate issues or things to cast aside, the weights and the sin. But let's ask the first question that's important to understand. He starts this, therefore, and I mentioned that all of these statements he's leading up to, he's trying to build the case before he gets there. Therefore, why is it, what purpose is therefore there for? And it's because he's referring to all that's come before, or a statement, or an argument that he is laying out before the children, before the church, concerning what he's trying to say. And he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. What witnesses is he referring to? This will help us give the imagery of what the apostle is talking about. Anyone know what witnesses? Harry? The saints that have gone before us, specifically whom? Elijah would be one of them. The disciples may or may not be. I don't know if they were in heaven yet. Some of them probably were. James was definitely there, but... Okay, right? What comes before it? What is chapter 11 all about? The examples or the heroes of the hall of faith. So he's referring to those who have gone before us, the heroes of the faith. Right? And he mentions that he didn't have time to lay out all of them. He's talked about Abraham, he's talked about Noah and Joshua and Moses, and he's talked about Isaac and Jacob, he's talked about Sarah, he's talked about Cain, he's talked about Enoch. He's brought out these. He says, time would fail me to go through, and then he names David and all the other prophets, Samuel and Gideon, and on he mentions there. How they served God, how some of them were blessed, and some of them were tormented and persecuted, and some of them went through issues, and some of them had tremendous favor, and some of them choices they made, and all that he lays out in Hebrews 11. And he says they are in a crowd. The picture is like an auditorium or a sports venue. Picture, if you will, in your mind, Orchard Park. So here's a 70,000 seat stadium that people go and they watch football games there and cheer on the crowd and cheer on the home team mostly, and occasionally rebels that would go and root for the opposing team, and you have to be careful when you're there. I know that personally. But anyway, and so you're there, you're seeing the game, and it's happening, and they're cheering, and when good plays are made, the crowd goes crazy, and this is the picture. There's something about home field advantage that people will have in basketball. Some stadiums will have the sixth player, a fan, that they will nominate as a member of the team, an honorary member of the team, because they're in the crowd. The hockey will have the seventh player. Remember the Boston Bruins, when I was growing up, they had the seventh player award. And this would be that. There's 11 players on the field in football, and in Seattle, they call the crowd the 12th. Number 12. And it's one of the loudest. Seattle Seahawks Stadium is one of the loudest stadiums. And so in that imagery, he says, now, therefore, we're running a race. Now we're the ones on the field. And the old saints, the ones that were before us, are all in that imagery of being in the audience watching us now. and that there is this cloud of witnesses that is looking for us to do well. There's something about the heroes. Every team has their own Hall of Fame. If you go to, again, Orchard Park, you'll see on the around the stadium, they have different, of course, Jim Kelly is one of them, and one they were sure they're not real thrilled about. O.J. Simpson is on there, but there's numbers of players that make the difference. And when Jim Kelly comes, they interviewed Josh Allen, and he said when he's in the building, led them to 4 Super Bowls. Unfortunately for them, they did not win any one of them, but 4 Super Bowls in a row. Jim Kelly was there. He's a hero. He's an inspiration that excites Josh Allen, who is a very good football player on his own right. Very athletic individual. And so here's the picture that the apostle is putting out there, is that, you know what? Abraham and Moses and Esther and David and Gideon and Amos and Malachi are all looking down upon us, not to mention the New Testament saints, Peter and Andrew and, Thaddeus and Marys and many Marys that were there. And, they're all looking down. They're cheering for us. Because we are the purpose. We are God's plan in action for the earth. And as they're looking down and cheering for us, the apostle is making out the argument that we should be trying to give them our best. Not only that, but looking to Jesus, the ultimate hero of our faith. And saying he is, of course, the motivation that our text lays out. He talks about the great cloud of witnesses and all the heroes of our faith in chapter 11. And then, of course, nails it down. And we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the ultimate. There's 2 men in the NFL that are noted and noteworthy. One, of course, is Coach Lombardi. In fact, the Super Bowl trophy is named after him. He is the coach of coaches in the NFL. The one to take his team to 2 back-to-back Super Bowl wins in the first 2 Super Bowls. The other would be a player. His name was Jim Thorpe. He was so incredible story. Jim Thorpe's story is just incredible. But he was a Native American who was treated very poorly, but played sports, played football, unbelievable. And in the early days, they even made him commissioner at one point. And it was a token position. But he became the face of the NFL. And there's still, Jim Thorpe is still one of the founders of much of what football is today. And so these kinds of heroes, Cy Young in baseball, one of the greatest pitchers that ever pitched, and has one of the distinct, very, very few perfect games have ever been pitched by a pitcher. They had one this year, actually. I think I heard that there were only 27 in all of baseball history. 27 times, no one reached base. The pitcher pitched the whole game. Incredible. They give out an award called the Cy Young Award. That's the picture that they have here. And of course, this is magnified by a gazillion when we're talking about Jesus and spiritual truths. But I'm bringing those illustrations in to show that when he's talking about the heroes of the faith, this is a motivation for us. That David and those that are watching, and of course Jesus is there. And he mentions 2 issues that we've got to deal with. One is the weight, and the other is the sin. And he makes different illustrations of these. Weights slow us down. Now, people might, in training, use weights. In baseball players, when they're using, when they're in the batter's box, they might use two bats. They might put a weight on the bat. They have these little weights that go over the top of the bat to make the bat heavier. That when they're swinging and practice swinging, there's that weight. But when they go to the plate, they take it off. When they're actually going to hit, they take off that weight. It's to get the wrists warmed up and things like that. And this is the imagery that they're using. What are some of the weights that Christians have that could slow them down in their Christian life that aren't necessarily sins? What are some of the weights? Nelson? Money, or a love of money? Right? We need money. Every one of us here has bills, responsibilities, desires, right, that cost money. But some people, it becomes a weight on them. Randy? Hobbies is another one that can definitely slow people down. Love to come to church, but I have to go jet skiing this morning. Nelson? Family could be another hindrance. Mexican mamas, referred to at conference, almost every conference. These are the mamas that rule, that demand, and so that family can become a hindrance. Excellent. These are great. These are all in my notes. Anyone else? Terry? Bad attitudes. Wrong mindsets. Some people have bad attitudes all the time. Everybody's out to get them. You know, Pastor Stevens preached a great sermon called See No Evil. Some people that create their own problems. Excellent. Anyone else? How about past failures? Some people hold on to their past failures. I can never get above this past failure. I failed when I was young, and I guess I'll always be that way. Fears. Some people are afraid. Oh, if I do that, if I step out, so I'll just slow down. Jesus, risen from the dead, Mary Magdalene goes and tells the disciples. John and Peter run to the grave. Peter's just denied the Lord 3 times, and he hasn't seen Jesus since. Wasn't at the crucifixion. John was there. When they ran to the grave, it says that John got there before Peter. I wonder what was going through Peter's mind as he's running that slowed him down. John waited because Peter was older, let him in. But this thought, and so we get the idea here that there are many things that can hinder that aren't necessarily sin. You can't say there is a commandment that says, thou shalt not remember your past failures and let it slide. It's not there. It doesn't rise to stealing or murder or adultery or those kinds of things. Matthew 19, 16 through 22.
Someone came to Jesus with this question, Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life? Why ask me about what is good? Jesus replied, there is only one who is good. But to answer your question, if you want to receive eternal life, keep the commandment. Which ones? The man asked. And Jesus replied, you must not murder, you must not commit adultery, you must not steal, you must not testify falsely, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor as yourself. I've obeyed all these commandments, the young man replied. What else must I do? Jesus told him, if you want to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions, give the money to poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, for he had many possessions.
We did read the text, right? Did we? Jeremy, did you read it? Okay, yeah. For some reason, I spaced it for just a moment. So here's the thought there that the man owned many possessions. Sin, not in this man's life. Now, we don't know 100%. I know all have sinned. The Bible is very clear about that. But he says, I've kept these commandments. Didn't dishonor my parents. I didn't murder. I didn't steal. I didn't commit adultery. I've done it. Okay, one thing you lack. He had great possessions, and that bothered him. That now hindered him. Now, very interesting. Jesus only told the apostles to follow him. Others asked to follow him, and he said no. This man was told, "Sell all that you have, follow me." Could he have been the one to replace Judas? We don't know. And because of his decision, we'll never know. That was lost as a hindrance, a weight. A weight. And we could also ask the question, his youth was definitely gone by now. Where are his riches? They obviously didn't last as well. Luke 14, 26 and 27.
If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple.
This word, just for the record, love less than me, what Jesus is saying. Not saying you have permission now to hate your mother and father and everybody else. What he's saying is if they take priority over me, it's good to love your parents. It's actually a commandment to love your parents. Honor them. Obey them when you're young. Right? To know what is right. But he says, you know what, if you put anything above me, you're now going to miss out. I've seen people put their family above Jesus. The question always is, whose blood is thicker? Christ's blood or your family's blood? Which one means more to you? And I've seen all sorts of things happen that causes people to miss out on the will of God, the purposes of God. Because it's a weight. It's a weight. I know they're here now, and when my wife and I were overseas for 14 years. And I think we were overseas for about 10 years at the time this happened. I can still picture it very vividly in my mind. My mother's not a Christian, and she would ask us all the time, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? But what struck us one time when my in-laws, who are very saved, my father-in-law asked me, when are you going to bring my little girl home? And I'll tell you what, my wife had to fight back the tears. And we had said, we knew our kids weren't going to be thrilled about leaving their friends and family and living, and now they're both thrilled that they had the opportunity. But during the teenage years, of course, they're missing out on some things in the States and, all of that kind of thing, not realizing that they're getting to visit and see things that their friends will only see in pictures. But then on the other side, to have that, and it was like, wow, that was tough. And my wife, we got in the car and she cried. And my mom, and they don't know that. But that hit us hard. It hit us hard. It was like, wow, we got to make a decision. We know it's the will of God for us to be there. But what are we going to put above? So the picture here that is laid out is that you have to put Christ first. Listen to what Jesus said when a number of people came by him. Luke 59 through 62.
Then he said to another, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead. Go and preach the God." And another also said, "Lord, I will follow you. Let me first go and bid them farewell, who are at my house." Jesus said to him, "No one having put his hand to the plow, looking back, fit for God."
So when he says, "Let me go bury my father," this is not a funeral that was happening at the moment. It's literally, let me go home and secure my future in business. Then I'll obey. And Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead." Go on. And another said, let me go say goodbye to my family. And the danger that Jesus is talking about here is the will of God cannot be a vote. How many think I should go? How many think I should stay? That's not how the will of God works. God's kingdom is a theocracy. He runs it by his sovereign will. It's not a democracy. That's hard for Americans and Westerners to get their minds around. Because we have talk radio, our opinion counts. We've got social media, our opinion counts. Unless you're on Twitter and you're conservative, then it doesn't. I guess Elon's fixing that, which is making all the liberals nervous and uptight. Which is why I don't have any social media. Here is the two big ones: fear of the future. Let me set my future in, and let me check with my family before I do the will of God. Those two. Now, of course, you need to check with your wife. She's got to go with you. God calls couples, but it's not, let me see what my dad thinks. Let me see what my mom thinks first. Luke 10:41 and 42.
But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all things detailed. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it. It will not be taken away from her."
So here again is the picture of just worry. Right? She's sweating all the details, and I understand details are important. Details is where leadership is made. You got to pay attention to the details. There was an old television show on where Gordon Ramsay would go into restaurants and try to help them get there. A lot of times their food was horrible. And I think it was called Kitchen Nightmares. And one plane ride I had, the big screen, this before every seat had its own thing, and now your device can do it. But they would show that, and they showed 6 episodes in a row of Kitchen Nightmares. And so in this, they went into one, and it was in Massachusetts. It actually was just in what they call the South Shore. It's between Boston and Cape Cod. So this got my attention. It's actually near where I grew up, and it was a seafood place. And Gordon went in, and he's looking at the food, and he asked the owners a question. What is your weekly costs of running your restaurant? And the couple that was running the restaurant said, we don't know. He said, you just made me a clam roll and put probably 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of lobster in there. And you're charging me $8.95. That lobster probably cost you $10. That much lobster probably cost a restaurant $10. Never mind the cooking of it, never mind the wages of the people who brought it to him or prepared it for him, never mind the other things on the plate. Just they're already losing $1 on that, plus all these others. He says, you're your business model is insustainable. You're going to go broke doing what you. That's an important detail in running a restaurant. Say, well, I just wanted to cook. I just wanted. Yeah, I understand that, but that is a reality. That details are important, but to be consumed with them over what's of greater importance would be a mistake. So this is the weight that does so easily beset us. We have to cast those aside. Any questions or comments on those? Okay, let's think about the sin then. I need some scriptures. I need 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10. Randy? 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27. Terry? Matthew chapter 18, verses 8 and 9. Jeremy? And 1 Timothy 3 and verse 6. Aiden. So, let's talk then about the sin. As Tyndale renders this, he said it is the sin that hangs on to us. The sin that hangs on us. The picture that he uses in our text is ensnares or traps us. Sin doesn't slow you down. Sin disqualifies you. Say that again. Sin doesn't just slow you down. It disqualifies you. When they run races, you will see DFN, or DNF rather, and DQF. DNF did not finish. So a race started and they dropped out for one reason or another. They did not finish. This can happen. Somebody like they could do the 100-yard hurdles, 100-meter hurdles, and somebody could twist an ankle and did not finish, would just limp off the side and for whatever reason. But DQF, disqualified. Disqualified. Kevin Johnson won in Atlanta, Georgia, the 1996 Olympics and set world records. Kevin Johnson was a Canadian. He had run and unbelievable, but this was just when doping was coming out. And so they had the urine sample of Kevin Johnson. They testified it, and he had steroids and testosterone and some other issues. And he was disqualified, stripped of his gold medal because of doping. They didn't knock him back in the rankings. Took him out. That's what the picture here in our text of sin does. It doesn't just hinder you, it disqualifies you. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 and 10.
Know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay, and you can see the list there in the New King James. That to put it in a little bit more understandable languages of our day, these aren't just a hindrance problem. The disqualification problem. Lance Armstrong won 6 consecutive Tour de France's. The hardest sporting event in the world. Without a rival. 30 days of riding a bike all over the country of France. They would do mountains, they do sprints, they do, all sorts of things. It is one of the most endurance, hardest physical races, events, competitions in the world. He won it 6 times in a row after recovering from testicle cancer. Incredible story. People really loved it. The problem is he was doping the whole time. The whole time he was using, and he was stripped of that. He went from hero to zero when it all came out. He had his life strong whole thing, marketing campaign, and he was selling bracelets and supplements and all, and the whole thing lays in total waste today. It's not just a hindrance to disqualification. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27.
But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified.
Disqualified. This is exactly what Paul is saying. And this can be done in a number of ways. Doping, there's Rosa. Was it Rosa Parks? No, that's the woman on the bus. Rosa somebody. She won the Boston Marathon, record time. Later footage showed that she had taken the subway for part of it. Right? Disqualified because she's a cheat. Matthew 18, 9 and 10. 8 and 9, I'm sorry. Matthew 18, 8 and 9.
If your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having cast it. If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it. It's better for you to enter into life with one eye rather than having 2 eyes.
Now, one commentator said of that, you better deal with your sin before your sin deals with you. To bring out that understanding of the capture of sin, the disqualification of sin. And sin could be numbers of issues, morals, it could be money, it disqualifies you. It's not just, oh, I'm struggling with it. No, you don't struggle with fear. You commit murder. You commit adultery. It's not a struggle. It's a violation. It's a line you've crossed. And so this will cause problems. So he says, not only lay aside the weights, but the snare of sin that will catch you. The picture there is like a bear claw that will catch the bear, dig into the flesh, and not allow that bear to move. And that way, when the hunter comes up upon it, it's easy prey. 1 Timothy 3 and verse 6.
Must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up and see in all the condemnation of the devil.
All right, condemnation or a trap or a snare, as some of the older versions would use the word there. The snare, the trap of the devil. The net, the laid in his way. So he's saying here in our text, let us cast aside the weight. Let us cast aside or work over the sin. Put it aside so that we can run the race. Now, are there any questions to this? And then we're going to ask one more question and look at the end of our study this week. Any questions to this point? Okay. Let's get a few more scriptures. We need Hebrews 12 and verse 2 of our text. Who would get that? Terry? I need then 1 Corinthians 9, 24 through 27. Did look at verse 27, but I want to look at Nelson, a bit more in a positive light. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 5. Philippians 3 and verse 14. Alicia. Hebrews 9 and verse 27. Stephanie. James 4 and verse 14. Randy. Ecclesiastics 9 and verse 10. Jeremy. Two more. Romans 13 and verse 11. Sawyer. And 1 Peter 4 and verse 7. Who would get that? Barbara? All right, so when we're looking at this, he gives us the thought of laying aside and putting these away. And we're going to look at the race, the course, and what that means. Because next week, the course and such, this is distinct. This has to do with the purposes that God has saved you for. And we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But these two stay in line. And so to help us, the apostle gives us forward two very great things that will help us, two very great understandings that will help us to get to the finish line. So let's read Hebrews 2, then we'll examine these. Hebrews 12 and verse 2.
Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Okay, so what would then, in this understanding of both the race that we'll look at next week and laying aside these issues, what is the first thing, the first encouragement that the apostle gives you and I to be able to lay these things, the weights and the sin aside? Alicia?
Step before him.
Okay. Said before who?
Speaking of Christ, but apply it to ourselves that has made the choice to set things aside, that we can also believe that same thing, that we let things go, that what we're letting go is of less value than what we're going to obtain.
That's excellent, but it's also part of next week's study. That is absolutely 100%. I have a great illustration of that, and I'll leave that for next week. But yes, that's the answer for next week. It really is. So be here and I'll call on you. How's that? But what's the first thing he says here? Look to Jesus. How many know it's hard to sin and look at Jesus at the same time? And if you don't, let me tell you, it is hard to sin and look at Jesus at the same time. The thought of keeping him as the center of our attention, keeping him as the center focus of who we are and what we do. And this is what the apostle is saying here in our text, is the men and women already accomplished. But unfortunately, David's accomplishments, Abraham's accomplishments may have some effect on my life today, but they have no eternal reward for me. But Jesus does. Jesus now becomes the center of our focus. Solomon even talked about this in Proverbs, but when a couple becomes infatuated, as one man said to me when I started dating my wife, he said, "You got them googly eyes." Just infatuated, just, attention, focus, that wonder. This is the picture of what we need with Jesus. We have witnesses that have already gone on. They're cheering us on, is the picture there. But our reward comes from Jesus. And that's going to have to do with joy and finishing the course and such. But the picture of just focusing on Jesus, focusing on what Jesus wants to do. It was a movie that just came out recently that I read about, and you'll understand when I tell you the title of this and the premise of it, why it caught my attention to read about it. It was called 80 for Brady. It had to do with this woman who had fought cancer and had not been interested in football at all. She's from Massachusetts. Not been interested in football at all, had cancer, had a couple of friends over, three friends, were all older ladies. Never had been interested in football. They watched this very first game when Drew Bledsoe was hit, cracked his ribs, almost died actually, taken out of the game, and a young rookie substitute was put in by the name of Tom Brady. They had followed Tom through his seasons, and at this point it was 17 seasons. And they went to the Atlanta Super Bowl. Now, this is when the movie gets crazy, as the girls meet everybody and anybody who's in there and make an announcement, break into the booth and whisper something into Tom's ear, which is all that. But Tom actually did meet these women beforehand and actually had known of this little pack group that was following him, and how she had battled back from cancer, and they used that as a metaphor for him coming back from the greatest Super Bowl deficit to win, and and that was the premise of the movie, which was all fake. They actually had real scenes from the football game in the movie, but that was about the closest to reality at that point that movie was at. But the picture there was the inspiration. And that's why it's a feel-good movie and such, and, whatever. And so, that the feel-good movie of just this whole thought of inspiration from somebody. The apostle says we need to take our inspiration from Jesus. That he's inspiring us to go on. 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27.
Don't you realize that in the race everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win the prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I am running with a purpose in every step. I'm not just shadowboxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training to do it as it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified.
2 Timothy 2:5.
An athlete is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules.
So the issue of crowning and the issue of getting rid of the disqualifying issues are linked together there in both these verses. That I discipline my body, that I don't want, I'm reaching the goal. We're going to heaven someday. Whether that's when you die or whether that's the rapture, but you're going to heaven. If you stay saved, you're going into eternity, and it's not bad to compete for the prize. To compete, to have that prize, to make all the struggles that we'll go through in life worth it. Philippians 3 and verse 14.
I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God.
I press towards the goal, the prize, the reward. That, there's something, and that goal, that prize for everyone is not going to be the same. I understand that. I hope you do too. I can't get your prize, you can't get my prize. They're there for us. But looking to Jesus. The second issue that we have to face in competition that is implied here, it's not actually brought out, is the issue of the clock. Time. We're running out of time in Sunday school. We've got to wrap this up. Looking to time, where we're at, that we don't have all the time in the world. We're limited. Hebrews 9:27.
And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment.
James 4:14. Got one more.
James 4:14. Here we go. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while and then it's gone.
Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10.
Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going.
So the happy Solomon there. But the reality of these and many other scriptures is we're limited on our time on earth. It's amazing how fast time goes by. It hit me at this conference when numbers of young kids came over to me, especially some of these young girls who are now young women. And how they were just, when I was there, just, it seems like 2 weeks in a wake-up ago, they were little girls. And now they're getting their driver's license. Some of them are getting engaged. Some of the young women who were there are now married and have children. And how quickly time goes by. It's amazing that I haven't changed and they have in all that time. Right? That time just goes by so fast. Now some of you have children, you're going to realize how fast. Just think back how fast the last year went. As we are literally in this building next week, we had closed and began working on it 1 year ago. How fast time goes. And how fast our life goes. And we're limited. We're limited in our time on earth to do what God has, to set aside the weights, to not allow the sin to trip us up and disqualify us. That there is a time limit that each one of us faces. And this is very critical and important to understand. Not only are we limited on our own lives, but we're limited on the fact that Jesus is coming back. Romans 13 and verse 11.
This is all the more urgent. You know how late it is. Time is running out. Wake up. For our salvation is nearer now than we first.
Our time is running out. Jesus is coming back. We have a limited time to make impact in the world, to save souls, to see them rescued from hell. We have a very limited time. And so if that is real, then it should affect our lives, such as, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but 1 Peter 4 and verse 7. To pray, or as the New Living Translation says, be disciplined in your prayers. To be disciplined in how we are taking advantage of the time that we have. And that has to do with putting off sin. It has to do with casting aside the weights that easily distract us and focusing in on what God has for our lives. Any questions or comments? Next week we're going to look at the race, or literally the course that God has put before us. Okay. The Lord bless you. We'll start service in a few minutes.